Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Del Mar Chabad Center, and today our subject is charity and hospitality. For most people it may not be new. For other peoples it may be a totally foreign idea. Something that charity has become part of the Jewish tradition for thousands of years, and it was taught over from one generation to the other. A little bit, it's been through the 70s, the 80s, and of course we're in the 90s. We've gone in through the me generation. Charity, in a certain sense, has gone by the wayside. People have always thought, oh, I got to get myself a better status and level of living, and all right, maybe a little bit I'll help somebody else out. Maybe if a panhandler comes, I'll give him a few dollars. But in a real meaningful sense of charity, it's not there. And number two, hospitality also, maybe because of the culture we live in. Someone comes into town, they don't need to knock on your door and say, hey, do you have a bed or an extra meal for me? There's restaurants around. There's always a motel or a hotel to be had. No one has to walk into town and feel that they need a special hospitality. So mainly it's because of our culture, a little bit because of the educational system doesn't push at charity as much as maybe they should. Well, of course, that's what we're here for, is to educate, but we educate with a special sweet way, sugar-coated way, which is with stories. Now, and many times we talked about it before, stories are not fairy tales in Judaism, that they carry a very high level of a moral. Stories are not just for children, stories are for adults. And actually, I just want to bring out to you, stories are a major Jewish tradition of learning. Many people today would say, oh, stories, stories, kid stuff. It's not that way in Judaism. Stories have a tremendous amount of ability to convey a message that really lecturing just wouldn't have. If I'd sit here and lecture, you'd feel, oh, the man is lecturing to me, the rabbi's telling me a sermon. I don't want to hear it. So when we tell stories, everybody loves stories. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they're babyish. And certainly not with Torah stories. Well, here's an interesting story, and I want you to be all excited in preparation to hear this story because it really is a beautiful story. And this is a story, just a little introduction. For people who know, then it's obvious, but for a Jewish person that passes away, that the relative says Kaddish. Kaddish is really not a mourner's prayer, it's just really how great the Almighty is, and just installs the feeling of awe and respect in the Almighty, even though, of course, that person just went through a tremendous loss of a loved one. Nevertheless, this Kaddish prayer that the relative in the world is saying helps the person in the next world, the departed soul, raise higher and higher. So it's a very important thing for a person to hear the Kaddish. Young Shmuel was a total stranger in this far-off town. True, he had been accepted as a student in its yeshiva, but he preferred to subsist on lean rations of bread and water rather than follow the current custom of eating his meals by roster at the home of a different householder every day of the week. This is long ago. Nowadays, of course, just to put a little bit of a parenthesis into this idea nowadays that, again, modern ideas, that we have the dormitories in the schools, and they do eat good lunches, but in dinners. But in those days, they didn't have, and you'd go around from one family to another to eat your dinner. A few days after his arrival, while he was on his way late at night to buy the loaf of bread, which would last him for several meals, an old woman turned to him with an urgent request. Believe me, young man, I'm not accustomed to asking for donations, but my son is in terrible trouble. He's been arrested for theft. He's utterly innocent, of course, but now I've got to raise enough money somehow to free him from prison. I beg of you, perhaps you would like to have a share in the mitzvah, the nice deed of ransoming captives to the best of your ability. The young man immediately put his hand into his pocket in order to give her his last few copper coins, apologizing meanwhile that was all he had to give. I'm sorry, young man, she said. I see that you are a poor yeshiva rabbinical student who could do with a little support yourself. With these words she offered him a silver coin. He refused to accept, insisting instead that she take his few copper coins and his participation in the fund for Pidyon Shavuim, the redemption of captives. The woman persisted. There's not a donation that I'm giving you. It's payment for reciting Kaddish. You see, this evening is the anniversary of my husband's passing, and my son won't be able to say Kaddish on his father's yahrzeit for the elevation of his soul. So I would like you to say Kaddish for my late husband, as well as for all the other folk of this town whose yahrzeit falls this evening. That way the silver coin will be honestly earned, and at the same time you'll have earned a rich mitzvah. Under these conditions, Shmuel now agreed, provided that she would take his copper coins at his share in the mitzvah for which she was collecting. Both satisfied, they parted company. The young man went straight to the local base medrash, a synagogue, and after the evening prayer, said Kaddish as he had promised to, and moreover studied some Mishnayos, some of the part of the Talmud, for the benefit of the souls of the departed. From there he proceeded to the baker's as intended. On the way there, however, he met a dignified elderly gentleman with a long white beard who turned to him with a friendly voice. "Young man," he said, "I would like to tell you how grateful I am for the Kaddish that you have recited this evening. A sweet Kaddish, straight from the heart." He handed Shmuel a crumpled note from his pocket and continued, "This is addressed to a dear friend of mine. Please hand it to him, and he will provide you with an honorable fashion with everything you need. And by the way, lots of success in your studies." But before the surprised young man could manage to thank him, the kindly old man had disappeared into the night. Having finally bought his bread, Shmuel returned to his yeshiva and opened the pretentious note. His elation soon withered. For when he had first arrived at this town, he had been directed to the home of some leading citizen who was to have arranged him regular meals at one fixed address. Instead, this Parnes, leader of the community, had proposed that he do the rounds of a half a different householders, and they had sent him unceremoniously on his way. And thus, this was the man whose name was written on the old man's note. Since there seemed to be little alternative, Shmuel decided to visit him the next day anyway. After one glimpse at the note, the gruff stranger asked in a voice that trembled, "But who gave you this note?" The young man explained how the night before he had met a dignified elderly gentleman who had thanked him for a Kaddish he had said, and had then handed him this note. It was the word Kaddish that electrified the stranger. Shaking from head to foot, he asked, "For whom did you say the Kaddish?" Shmuel now told of his encounter with the old woman whose son was unable to say Kaddish after her husband, and how she had therefore paid him to do so. The stranger seized his head in his hands and walked up and down his room like one possessed. Spinning around suddenly to face Shmuel, he asked him intently, "Did you get a good look at the old man's face?" "Such a dignified countenance I'll never forget," he said. "Here, follow me," said the stranger, and led him into a nearby room where a number of portraits hung on the walls. "Do you recognize the man you met among these?" "Of course," said Shmuel, pointing out one of the portraits. "This is the man who spoke to me last night." The stranger collapsed into a chair and broke down in bitter tears. After quite some time, while Shmuel stood in silence, waiting for him to regain his composure, he turned to Shmuel in a voice and began to explain himself. "My dear friend, the old man who spoke to you is no other than my late father. He passed away 10 years ago. When you handed me this note, I recognized his handwriting at once. My first thought was that you had forged it, and that I had a swindler standing here before me. But then I recalled that since you were a total stranger in this town, you could never know my late father. Then when you said that word Kaddish, I recalled that today is the anniversary of his passing, and I had forgotten it completely. Woe is me! Look how deep I have sunk in the vanities of the world, if I have forgotten the yahrzeit of my own late father." He paused a moment to collect his thoughts, and then thanked his young visitor for having said the Kaddish that he should have recited. Before they parted company, he handed him the amount that was written on the note, undertook to support him throughout his stay in the town, and asked him as well to provide him with a list of needy yeshiva students so that he could see to their needs too. And from that day on, he became a different man, open-handed and generous. But though he was charitable in many ways, his favorite mitzvah always remained the ransoming of captives. For was that not the mitzvah that had first connected the young man with his mother, the good deed through which he himself had now become a new man? Well, it's an amazing but true story. And there's many stories like that. I almost had one personally. People will know that there's a famous play called The Dybbuk, and I actually went to the theater and went to see it, and truth to tell, didn't agree with everything that it was portraying. Not to get into that story right now, but the director who we were talking to, and this is in Joe Paff's theater in in New York City, the late Joe Paff, because he passed away recently, and the director there justified herself with the play and saying, you know, that on the play, I don't want to get into the whole idea about the Dybbuk here, but there is a Kaddish said for a departed one on the stage, and he said that someone came over to her and that says, oh, I really feel, of course, through the drama of theater, how important it is for a soul in the departed world, in the next world, to have a Kaddish said after them. I'm surely going to be sure that someone's going to say Kaddish after me. So it really is an important idea to say Kaddish after somebody, and that is departed, and it's a benefit for themselves, and of course for the person and in the next world. Now, here's another story about some people that turn away and not doing the right things and have to be a little bit nudged, a little bit coerced into doing the right thing. So this is the story of the power of a humble penny. You only had to mention his nickname, the Miser, and everyone in Berdichev knew exactly whom you meant. For there was only one man in town, Rachmiel by name, whom no poor man would dare to visit. Everyone already knew from bitter experience that he had learned to block his ears to the outcry of the needy. From time to time, when the annual appeal for the community chest was conducted in town, there would be some daring individual who would try to find his way to his heart, but to no avail. In fact, he even added distinctive style to his refusal. Whenever approached for funds, he would offer a rusty old copper coin, and when admonished for his conduct, he would chuckle. Well, you're certainly not going to get any more than that out of me, he would say, and would turn the miserable coin to his wallet. So it was that as the years went by, people stopped visiting his home altogether, and he remained utterly isolated. One day, the town was visited by no less than a personage than Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of Tanya. He had come in order to raise funds for the ransom of captives, and his overjoyed followers in Berdichev arranged a festive welcome in his honor. The tzaddik, the righteous man, Reb Shneur Zalman, was no longer a young man, yet he had somehow mustered the strength to come. For, as he said to his chassidim, one can hardly let a mitzvah like this pass by neglected. He addressed his gathering on the obligation of each individual to participate in the all-important mitzvah, and the response was open-hearted, worthy indeed of Berdichev. But when he set out on the next stage of his appeal, calling on individual townsmen, while accompanied by the local dignitaries, they all urged him to avoid a certain proud mansion that they now reached. Why should they allow the Alter Rebbe to undergo needless humiliation? The guest stood still, however, and asked them that why they were not conducting him to this particular house. Without hesitation, they answered in a chorus, "Him? He's an impossible miser. His hands are locked tight. A heart of stone, no one ever comes here. He's only got one rusty copper coin to offer. And whenever a collector declines to accept it, he just puts it back in his purse." Having heard them out, he turned to the heavy iron gate. Please come with me, he said to his companions. This man is a Jew after all, and he is obliged to fulfill the mitzvah tzedakah, just like every one of us. Opening the door to such a distinguished delegation, Yerachmiel seated them all around his table and waited for the Alter Rebbe, it was called Reb Shneur Zalman Liadi, to speak. The tzaddik came straight to the point. We have come here in order to ask for your contribution to the ransom of captives. True to ingrained habit, Yerachmiel opened the door of his cabinet and took out his old leather wallet. The dignitaries of the community felt decidedly uneasy, but perhaps just this time the hardened old miser would at least feel shame in the presence of the tzaddik, would wrench himself from his hard-hearted custom. But it was not to be. He took out that disgusting old familiar coin, held it out to the Rebbe, and in a dry voice repeated the usual insulting formula. This is what I'm giving. If you like it, take it. If not, I will put it right back into my wallet. The experienced communal collectors were sure that the tzaddik would refuse to accept it. Instead, however, he put it in his own wallet and calmly said to his treasurer, now please record the amount that I received from Rebbe Yerachmiel. The visit was over and he turned towards the door, but something strange happened. Yerachmiel remained standing transfixed and his eyes streamed with tears. Then, shaking violently like a man seeking to free himself from the clutches of a dreaded nightmare, he cried out to his guest, Rebbe, I didn't show you the respect that I ought to have shown. Please, I beg you, take a seat once more at my table, and I will offer you refreshments in a fitting manner. He sprang to life. Within minutes he had covered the table with a sparkling white tablecloth and delicacies and choice beverages. His townsmen were amazed. Was this a dream? Had this man in fact changed his colors within the space of 1 minute? But the sudden exuberance of their host swept them off their feet. Drink, my brothers. Please say l'chaim with me. Join me in my simcha, because I have been privileged today to be visited in my home by the distinguished tzaddik. In no time they were all toasting the Rebbe and their host, and as they clapped their hands and sang together, the rollicking sounds of their joy bounced through the window into the street. Passers-by paused a moment out of curiosity, and soon found themselves invited inside and whirled into the rhythm of the dancing throng. More tables were brought in, and within a short time half the town was jostling happily for a little corner in the spacious reception room of the local miser. The Alter Rebbe indicated that he had something to say. With a moment, the entire jovial crowd fell into a hushed silence. My beloved brothers, he began, today we have all learned a lesson that can help us in our service of the Creator and in our ongoing battle with the evil inclination. For he bothers us constantly with his attempts to dislodge us from our rightful place in this world and to disinherit us from the share in the world to come. And to each individual he comes in a different guise. Now all these years he has succeeded in taking hold of Yerachmiel, not allowing him to give tzedakah, charity. Why? Because he never managed to give charity even once. That same rusty copper coin held him back, a veritable Satan in his path, because it never left his possession. In this case, then, our friend was held captive in the hold of Satan, only because there was no one willing to relieve him of his coin. Since, however, his coin had now been taken from him, his heart had been opened, and the obstacle has been removed from his path. And since one mitzvah begets another, his heart is now ready and prepared to warm to anything in the cause of holiness. L'chaim, my friend. As for Yerachmiel, he again took out his wallet and counted out into the Rebbe's hand no less than 2,000 rubles. And from that day on, every hungry and threadbare caller in town knew where he could depend on a welcoming smile, a luscious meal, and a generous donation. The Alter Rebbe had caused an eloquent lesson, for there is no Jew so incorrigible that he should be turned away. Rather, one should take him warmly to one's heart and raise his better spirits. So we see that we have to talk to everybody and deal with everybody and accept everybody for what they are and ultimately the good that they have, will be accepted and will prosper if we'll just give everybody that wants to do good a little bit of a chance. Now, I wanted to read a little story about hospitality, even though a little bit we talked about hospitality. But here's a beautiful, beautiful story, and it's called The Power of a Sigh. With nightfall, the mists of winter had settled over Mezhbuzh, city in Central Europe. Shabbos had departed. Havdalah, the ceremony that separates Shabbos and the weekdays, had been said, and the Baal Shem Tov asked his wagon driver to harness the horses. Before long, the holy man and his disciples were seated in the wagon and had begun their journey. As usual, he told the driver to let the reins hang loose and to allow the horses to gallop in whatever direction they chose. Suddenly they began to speed wildly ahead. The valleys turned into plains and the hills ceased to exist. In no time they had swallowed up vast distances. The merciless cold bit into the lean bodies of his disciples, but they kept their pain to themselves. Though they themselves did not know the reason for this strange journey, they knew that they were accompanying their Rebbe for some lofty purpose. The wagon finally came to a halt near a wretched little cottage in some remote village, where the haggard householder asked them to enter. He told them that a long time had passed since he at last had the opportunity of fulfilling the mitzvah of hospitality. Since the bitter winter had set and no stranger had passed through his village, this was therefore a very happy day for him. The Baal Shem Tov asked him to prepare tea and hot milk for his disciples, and their host did so joyfully. When they had all eaten and drunk and rested from the arduous journey, the host introduced himself as Moshe and asked them, "From where do my brothers come?" "From Mezhbuzh," they said. "Oh, so you know the great tzaddik who lives in your town, Rebbe Yisrael Baal Shem Tov," he asked. At this point, the Baal Shem Tov asked their host not to burden his disciples with further questions. It was late, and it would be preferable to prepare beds so that they could rest. For 5 whole days, the little party stayed in their cottage. Their host exerted himself to the point of self-sacrifice to see it to that they should lack neither food nor drink, giving away even the meager rations that they were set aside for his own family. And with all that, he and his wife were animated by the joy of the mitzvah, for had heaven not granted them the opportunity of extending hospitality to strangers? When they decided to return to their hometown, he showed them the customary courtesy of accompanying them beyond the outskirts of the village. "Just one favor," he said to them as they parted. "When you arrive at Mezhbuzh, could you please mention my name to the great tzaddik, Rebbe Yisrael Baal Shem Tov? I would like to have his blessing, that heaven grant that I be a faithful and God-fearing Jew." "My friend," said the Baal Shem Tov, "I am the man whom you seek, and there will yet come a time when you will understand why we came to your home." When Moshe came home, he found his children hungry and crying. Not only was there no food left, but in order to provide for their guests, he and his wife had even sold some of their humble belongings. Seeing the tears of his helpless children and the anguish of his noble wife, Moshe suddenly uttered a bitter cry. "Master of the universe," he explained, "why should the children have to undergo the pangs of hunger? Why are they guilty?" He remained silent for a moment, as if awaiting an answer, and a stranger knocked at the door. Moshe opened it, and Ivan, an aged Gentile neighbor, walked in. From time to time he would drop in just to enjoy a touch of vodka with his friendly host. Moshe wanted to tell him at once that there was nothing whatever in the house that he could offer him. But Ivan spoke first. "This time I've come for something very important," he said, "even more important than our usual little drop of vodka." The burly peasant suddenly grew serious. "Moshki," he said in a hoarse whisper, I've got a secret to tell you. You know that I'm old and weak and sick. You know, too, that I live with my daughter and son-in-law and that I don't get along with them. So listen now to what I want to suggest. I'll come and live in your house. I don't need much, but in exchange for your hospitality, you'll be well rewarded, very well rewarded. You see, Moishka, I've got a treasure hidden away. Tens of thousands of golden coins all hidden away. You can go there right now and take as much as if you want. When the time comes, Moshka, that whole treasure will be yours. Yours alone." Reading from Moshe's face that he was not only stupefied, but doubtful as well, Ivan took him by the hand and with heavy steps led him through the thick forest that loomed over the cottages at the edge of the village. He stopped at the foot of a mighty tree, and after digging for a few moments, hauled out a leather sack full of gold coins. "Here," he panted, "give us a hand and we'll take it off all to your home. And no one, of course, has to know about our little find." From that day on, no one in Moshe's house was ever hungry. Day after day they rejoiced in the miracle that had transformed their lives, and in due course needy people from all around had reason to find out that Moshe was now a rich man and that his door was always open. The aged peasant lived in Moshe's house for only a few weeks. Then one day, while on a visit to the home of his daughter, he died suddenly. The treasure was now the property of Moshe, who continued to put it to good use. One day he recalled the visit of the Baal Shem Tov in his house and decided that the time had come for him to visit the tzaddik and to bask in the holy light that he radiated. When he arrived at Mezbah, the Baal Shem Tov greeted him warmly and asked after his family.